Hello Adobe, I am Chef Jackie from the Layers Cafe and welcome to my home kitchen. So today we are going to learn how to make cheddar barley dog biscuits. So I have most of the ingredients already mise en place. I have my sheet pan with my parchment paper on it, and I have my oven preheating to 300 degrees. So what's left is grab a big bowl and we will start mixing everything together. Okay, so in my big bowl, I'm gonna measure out the barley flour. So we need 2 cups of barley flour. And the important thing about measuring out flour ingredients is that you are spooning it in. So it's important, scoot this over, so that way you aren't compacting all of the flour. Usually when I use flour for recipes, I always like to weigh everything out in grams because it's just much more accurate. But if you aren't able to do that or your recipe doesn't call for grams, then you're gonna wanna scoop everything into a measuring cup and then level it off. Okay, so we got 2 cups of that. Now I'll set this stuff aside. And we're just gonna add the rest of the ingredients. So we have our cheese, we have cheddar and Parmesan. So lucky dogs, they get Parmesan. Okay, and we have applesauce, steel cut oats, 2 tablespoons of olive oil. I just wanna mix this first, that way it's a little bit easier once I start adding in the water. Okay, so we'll start out with 3 because that's what the recipe says. And this is a Bon Appetit recipe. So that's 3, and we'll give it a stir. I ended up using a little bit more than 3. I wanna say around 5, just because you want it to be a moist dough that will come together. And it's gonna be a little bit on the wet side. So we want more. It says up to 9 tablespoons. So it just depends on the flour that you have and how old it is, how dry it is. So you can see that it's starting to come together. It's a little bit wetter. I can still see some dry flour in here, so I'm gonna add just 1 more tablespoon. Maybe 1 more for good measure. Okay, so in the recipe, it says that you should roll this out between plastic wrap. But I don't really like to use plastic wrap unless I have to, and I have a lot of experience making pie doughs and other moist doughs, so I'm just gonna do it without it, and I'm just gonna dump this out on a lightly floured surface. Whoops. So I have my bench flour. This is the flour that I use for baking bread. It's just regular wheat flour, all-purpose wheat flour. And then also it has some rice flour, which helps with less gluten development. And so both of those ingredients are okay for your dog, so you don't have to worry about that. So we are gonna dump this out. Scrape off the spatula. Don't wanna waste any of that Parmesan. Get rid of this bowl. And now just kind of bring it together. And this is kind of how you would make biscuits. I'm gonna use this bench scraper to kind of help me fold it over and kind of make layers. If you had butter in here, this would make like a nice flaky pastry. Okay, so I think that's probably good. And now I'm just gonna flour the top and then I'm gonna flip it over. If you were doing this between the plastic wrap, then you probably wouldn't have any problem at all. But since we aren't using the plastic wrap, we just have to make sure that it's not sticking to the bottom. And so now we're gonna roll this out to a 1/4 inch. And whenever I'm rolling stuff, I always like to use the bench scraper. Obviously, you don't need this tool in order to make this recipe. But I like to rotate it so that I know it's not sticking to the bottom. Just put that back there. Kind of push in these edges. All right, and just make sure it's not stuck. I think this is probably good enough. And then I always keep a ruler in my kitchen so that I can measure out how big things are. So we're supposed to be a 1/4 inch thick. And let's see here. Yep, we're about 1/4 inch right there. So now I'm gonna take my bone cookie cutters here. I got 3 different sizes, but I'm gonna go with this 2 inch. I think it's a good size for my dogs. I have 2 big shepherds. So this is a good size for them just to give them 1 treat. If I had one this size, I'd probably break it in half and split it between both dogs, only because they get so many treats in a day. And then if I had a smaller dog, I'd probably use these smaller ones. But I figured that you get this is a 3 inch bone right here, and you get about 3 dozen biscuits from this recipe. So now we are going to cut out our bones and put them on the parchment paper lined pan. So just like that. And I'm just gonna do that with all of it. And then once I go through all of this dough, I'll be able to gather it again into a ball, roll it out, and cut out some more of these dog bones. And then this is the other good thing that the bench scraper is good for. So I can kind of get underneath there without really messing up the bones. And these aren't gonna expand. There's no baking powder, there's no baking soda, so you don't need to worry about making sure they're spaced out. So that's totally okay if they're pretty close together. All right, we'll get all of these bones on the sheet tray. And sprinkle some flour on top. There we go. And I did try this recipe without parchment paper as well. You can definitely do it, and I think it cooks a little bit faster. You just need to spray some nonstick spray or rub your tray with some oil, and that'll be just fine. You don't need to use parchment paper. Okay. All right, and there we go. We have a little over 3 dozen dog biscuits. So let's throw this in the oven at 350. Start out for 30 minutes, but it's probably gonna be closer to 45 or 50 minutes, but definitely check it because all ovens are different. Okay, so now that we have those ones in the oven, we can talk about these finished ones that we have right here. So if you look at them, they're nice, they're brown, they're crispy. You can hear that they're dried out. When you snap them, you hear the snap. And this is exactly what you're looking for. So when I baked these, I did it at 300. It took about 50 minutes. I would definitely check yours after 30 just to make sure, but you'll probably have to cook it for 45 to an hour. And then once they're done and they're all dried out, then you're gonna put them on a sheet tray with a cooling rack and then put those back in the oven and let them sit overnight until they're extra dried out. So let's see how these dogs like them. Jumping for joy over here. Sit. Good girls. This is Juniper, and this is Storm. Good girls. Down. Good down. Good down. There you go. What do you guys think, huh? I'd say that these treats are dog approved. So if you'd like to make this recipe or check out the many other pet food and pet treat recipes that we have, please take a look at our Spark page. Thanks for tuning in. Good girls. Good girls.